Many of my students and tutoring clients don't know where to begin for studying for the social work licensing exams. And in my experience, one of the most common question types presents you with a scenario and then asks what you should do, what the best course of action is, and particularly what should you do first or what should you do next as the social worker. So of course, having an understanding of the code of ethics and issues of diversity and cultural competence, human behavior theories, and evidence-based practice will all help you in determining what the best answer is. But I feel like one of the most important things to keep in mind are the steps of the helping process and making sure that you're doing things in order of what you would do with a client. So this video is going to take you through a memory trick that I came up with to help you know what you should do first, along with some practice questions that you can follow along with and test your knowledge. But I need to start with a disclaimer that this is not an official product of the ASWB. This is just based on my own experience taking the exams and reviewing a lot of material and helping my clinical supervisees and other people prepare for the exams. There's several models that help to provide acronyms or ways of remembering what the best course of action is or what the first thing you should do is, and I encourage you to explore and find commonalities because many of the different models that you'll find on other videos or study books or things like that, there's some commonalities, and I encourage you to find what sticks best in your mind and makes the most sense for you as you're practicing on the exam. So the model that I came up with is EAP in every terminal. And this is a way of remembering what the general order is of how we help in social work. And this can apply to many different types of practice settings. So before I explain it, I just want to also give the caveat that you should read each question as it is and don't get into a super rigid mindset of it has to be these steps, but rather consider this as a helpful guide to remember the order of how you would normally do things. So the way I remember it is EAP in every terminal, and that stands for engage, assess, plan, intervene, evaluate, and terminate. So EAP was already an acronym that I remembered because most people associate EAP with employee assistance programs. And so instead of it standing for that, I just used the same acronym that's already in my head and reapplied it to stand for engage, assess, and plan. The IN is for intervention, the EV is for evaluate, and termina is for terminate. So I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, and then also this little asterisk that I have here. Engage is so common. When I took my clinical exam, I felt like there were so many questions that I answered something along the lines of validating feelings or engaging and building rapport with the client. I passed, so hopefully I was right on some of those. And engagement encompasses acknowledging feelings, expressing and showing empathy, exploring feelings, rapport building, validation, all of those like micro skills in engaging a client, meeting them where they are. Only then can you move on to more formal assessments, and you need to assess and know what you're working with before you can collaboratively make a plan, and plans includes goal setting. Then you can do the thing, the intervention, whether that be a therapeutic intervention or whatever that looks like depending on the role in the scenario, but the actual intervention that you're working on. But you also then need to evaluate progress before you would terminate and end your helping process with the client. The main exception here is when you have to refer out. I call these the exception situations. So common ones might include abuse. If there is suspected child or elder abuse, you would need to report that. If there is interpersonal violence or domestic abuse, that would be contraindicated to doing couples counseling, for example. If there is an ongoing substance use disorder, and the person might need medical intervention to detox or get substance use treatment, unless the question specifically says that you work in a substance use disorder treatment facility, you probably are going to refer out for substance misuse because it's very related to medical, and medical is something that we always refer out. We only operate within the scope of our practice as social workers. We're not medical doctors. And so if there is something that could have a physiological root, we want to rule out physical or medical reasons for an issue. So some of those things might happen first. Otherwise, you are often going to follow a plan sort of like this. Let's look at some questions and see how comfortable you are with the EAP in every terminal acronym for engage, assess, plan, intervene, evaluate, and terminate unless you have to refer. During the first session with a clinical social worker, a young woman cries as she explains that her beloved cat recently passed away. The client says that she's had trouble sleeping and feels very sad when she's at home. She explains that nobody seems to care and she feels judged for grieving for the pet. The social worker should first acknowledge that the death of a pet is a significant loss, assess the client for prolonged grief disorder, refer the client to a grief support group run through a local hospice agency, or guide the client through a mindfulness exercise to help her feel calmer and more grounded. So people will often struggle because it's not just, what is the only good answer, it's what is the best answer. And that sometimes several of the answers are things that you might do with a client, but what would you do first? So take a moment, pause the video, decide for yourself, and guess what the answer is. And then I will reveal that the correct answer is A, to acknowledge that the death of the pet is a significant loss. This is engagement. This is meeting the client where they are, engaging, validating, focusing on feelings. The client said that she feels judged, and so expressing that you don't have judgment, that you acknowledge that this is a significant loss, would be a good place to start. Whereas an assessment might happen at a later time, although here it does say recently, and so if it's very recent, that is a normal response and probably not indicative of anything diagnostically in the DSM at this point, but an assessment might happen after you've acknowledged. And similarly, maybe there are times that a referral to a grief support group might work. I would say, if she's feeling that people are not understanding about the loss of a cat, that sending her to a support group of hospice agency where people are likely grieving for people who have passed, it could actually set her up to be in a situation where, again, people may not be as understanding of that experience that she's having. And then guiding her through a mindfulness exercise to help her be calm and grounded. That's not a terrible answer, right? That's not necessarily like a terrible thing that the social worker would do. It's just not what you would do first. So I hope that that kind of helps to explain some of these. Let's look at a couple more. A school social worker is approached by a parent who has noticed some changes in a male 5th grade student that her son often plays with. So this is the parent of a friend. And the social worker the concerns raised include dirty, ill-fitting clothes and unexplained bruises. The social worker knows that the student is very active in sports outside of school. How should the social worker respond? So breaking down the question, we have our scenario. We're a school social worker, and sometimes these contexts really matter, but oftentimes you're going to still use a similar process regardless of what setting it's in. So you can choose to attend one of the student's sporting events to observe how he interacts with his peers, teachers, and parents. Refer the case to Child Protective Services. Assure the informant that young boys often get dirty and banged up from playing sports and this is a normal developmental stage. Or ask the informant to confront the parents about the bruises. Well, we want to refer the case to CPS. Always, if there is suspected abuse, we are going to refer that as mandated reporters for child abuse. And having poor hygiene and maybe concerns about neglect, unexplained bruises, right? Not bruises because I was playing football, but unexplained bruises. And this is something that we automatically refer. If in this scenario we are the school social worker, we are not investigators. If the scenario says that we are child welfare agency, then perhaps we would do an investigation, but otherwise we don't investigate. So attending a sporting event and observing, that would be trying to investigate on your own, also potentially a dual relationship if this is an outside of school activity, so that's problematic. We do want to refer. We don't want to provide reassurances that, hey, this is a normal developmental thing, although knowing what is normal developmentally is helpful for the exam. In this case, it could be a true red flag of abuse, and so we don't want to jump to those reassurances. And asking the informant to confront the parents about the bruises is right out, because that could escalate the situation. That's not safe. That is a bad answer. So sometimes there are answers that you can just quickly eliminate, rule out, and look at the other options. So our final example here is that a new client explains to the social worker that he has previously been diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, but has never been prescribed medication because he prefers talk therapy to manage his symptoms. During the initial assessment, he speaks very quickly, jumps from one thought to the next, and describes a recent gambling spree that resulted in him being $10,000 in debt. So having some understanding, right, of what these diagnoses are, what are some different symptoms, and what might that look like can be a helpful foundation for you. So you might even kind of predict, okay, what would you first do if you got this information? The first option is to apply for a mental health warrant so that the client can be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital. Contact a family member of the client and encourage them to persuade the client to take mood stabilizing medication. Explore the client's feelings and goals for treatment, or assess whether the client will be able to pay for therapy given his financial situation. Pause it for a moment, think about what you would guess, and if you guessed C, then you were correct. We first want to explore. We want to validate and see what's really going on with this client, learn more about how they feel. Are these ego-syntonic or ego-dystonic things? And what are the goals? Why are they coming to you? And what would they like to accomplish? Assessing whether they're going to pay for service. I mean, maybe eventually you might need to determine, if someone is able, financially to pay for services, but that's certainly not the first thing that you would do right after this person is explaining what's going on in their life. That would be pretty insensitive. And we would not contact a family member to try and convince them to take medication for several reasons. One, we are not prescribing medications, and we are not, giving official advice on medications. We are also not violating HIPAA or confidentiality by reaching out to somebody else, usually, unless that's, explicitly said that there's consent for that. And we're also not wanting to violate a client's self-determination and autonomy, which in this case, there is nothing that indicates a serious and imminent threat to the safety of himself or others. Maybe these aren't good actions, but people have a right to make bad decisions. And so there's nothing in this prompt that says that we need to escalate to inpatient care by any means. So we want to just start with exploring those feelings and goals. I hope this was a helpful introduction to what should you do first. I do offer a comprehensive study guide on key social work concepts, as well as some private tutoring to break down practice questions on all the different topics. So please contact me if I can be of assistance in your studying journey. Best of luck.